Thank you, everybody, for joining in, and welcome to the information session on the update on the progress and peer review process of the indicator methodology on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. On behalf of Women4Biodiveristy, UNEP-WCMC, and SWEDBio, we are very grateful and honored to have you all today to talk to us and listen to us about the updates that we have done to the methodology on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. Okay, I'm having problems with my, just give me a second, sorry. Okay, I'm going to go without my slides. Sorry about that. So we started this process about a year ago. As you would know, Substar 26 at Nairobi in May has officially acknowledged a process on the development of a methodology for the component indicator for Target 23. This was part of the process that UNEP, WCMC, and Women4Biodiveristy were working towards. And we are happy to say that we now have an updated methodology available. It was after it was officially acknowledged, we also reached out to several parties as well as important stakeholders to help us develop this methodology. And we are now happy to share that it has been updated. And we will talk about it today. Just a few important points for all of you. The interpretation is available in French and Spanish. You can click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen to choose whichever language you're comfortable in. And also, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. If you have questions for our panelists, you can put your questions in that box, and any other general comments, we would appreciate if you limit it to the chat box. Thank you so much for being here, and I would just request Catherine and Aisha and the team at UNEP-WCMC to take over.
Thank you so much, Manal, and lovely to have you all here. Let me start by thanking parties that I see some of you are here for all of your efforts of co-developing this methodology. We've also had a lot of engagement from observers and from the CBD Women Caucus, so we really appreciate all of those efforts to ensure that we have a robust measure to track progress towards Target 23. The indicator addresses all elements from Target 23, as the indicator methodology is based on the expected outcomes, objectives, and actions from the Gender Plan of Action. So this indicator links Decision 1511, the Gender Plan of Action, with Target 23 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So parties will be able to use this indicator in the relevant sections of their national reports when they're reporting towards Target 23, and also when they're reporting on the Gender Plan of Action in the relevant sections of their national reports. Based on the feedback and the testing sessions that we've had with parties, it was also noted that this indicator, apart from being a measure to track progress over time, it's also a useful tool because it helps enhancing coordination between the relevant ministries and departments, from those that relate to the environment and those that relate to gender equality and women's empowerment. The the information gathered through the process of using this indicator can also be used for reporting towards the global indicator for target 23. So all of the evidence that is collected, all of that coordination between ministries results in relevant information that parties will be able to use when they are reporting on the binary indicator. We've gone through an extensive peer review process and consultations with parties, and my colleague Aisha is going to provide further details about the process. Over to you, Aisha.
Great. Thank you.
Aisha, before you start, I think there is some issue with the interpretation. So, are people able to access it? Okay,
I can
great.
see from the comments that it's fixed.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Aisha. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. As mentioned by my colleague Catherine, today we will be presenting updates on the indicator on national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, which is intended as an indicator to measure progress towards Target 23 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Framework, Biodiversity Framework, and which is now ready for use by parties. So I'm going to start by providing a brief introduction to the methodology. This will involve a recap of the context behind indicator development, as well as the key components of the methodology. I'll also provide an overview of the process we followed for co-developing the methodology, specifically the process of consultations and peer review. And then I'll provide an overview of the feedback we received through these processes. After this, I'll discuss some of the key improvements that were made based on this feedback, and then show you where you will be able to access the updated version. So a bit of context. As you know, at COP16, parties to the CBD adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes a Target 23 that relates to ensuring gender equality in the implementation of the framework through a gender-responsive approach where all women and girls have equal opportunity and capacity to contribute to the 3 objectives of the convention. At the same time, parties also adopted an ambitious gender plan of action that aims to support and promote the gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and therefore also the achievement of Target 23. The final decision I'll be addressing today is the monitoring framework, which, as you know, is a set of agreed indicators for monitoring progress towards the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So how does this indicator link these 3 decisions? The monitoring framework that was also adopted at COP15 includes a component indicator for Target 23 on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. So this component indicator links Target 23 with the implementation of the Gender Plan of Action and provides a tool to support parties in reporting on their progress and efforts towards implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework in a gender-responsive manner. However, at the time that this was adopted, the indicator still required the development of a methodology for use by parties in their upcoming national reports. Therefore, UNEP-WCMC and Women4Biodiveristy, with funding from SWED Bio, have been collaborating with parties, observers, and major groups to the CBD to co-develop an indicator methodology to track progress towards Target 23 and the implementation of the gender plan of action. So what did this process of co-development look like? To start, technical experts at UNEP-WCMC developed a first draft methodology that was outlined in a draft metadata document, which contained a rationale for the indicator, as well as details on data collection, methods of computation, and so forth. We also developed a calculation tool that's intended to support parties in using this indicator. And here you can see snippets of what these documents look like. Please note the image of the calculation tool is from a updated version for those of you who maybe seen an older version. So I'm going to quickly recap what the indicator methodology consists of. The methodology has two main components. Firstly, it includes a set of questions in the format of a questionnaire that are based on the indicative actions from the gender plan of action, specifically the actions for which parties are listed as a first leading responsible actor. And I'll provide a bit more detail on this in the following slide. But parties are listed as first leading responsible actor for 18 out of 30 of the indicative actions in the gender plan of action. So therefore, we have 18 questions in our questionnaire. These questions are intended to be answered by parties through a designated national focal point or responsible individual from a leading agency, such as the Gender Biodiversity National Focal Point, or another focal point with gender expertise, or who works closely with gender experts. The questions are all multiple choice questions with either single answer options or select all that apply answers. And I should note that the questions were developed using wording that's closely aligned, or as close as possibly aligned to wording from the adopted text of the gender plan of action. So that would be specifically the indicative actions. Then the second component of the methodology is the calculation of an index. Based on parties' responses to the questionnaire, an index can be calculated, which is then translated into a score that can be tracked over time. More detail will be provided on this a bit later in the presentation. But in order to provide a bit more clarity on the methodology and its links with the gender plan of action, I'm first going to quickly recap the key elements of the gender plan of action. So the gender plan of action contains 3 expected outcomes, one of which you can see on your screens right now. And linked to these outcomes are specific objectives. And under these, there are a set of indicative actions for achieving these objectives. The plan of action also contains a list of possible deliverables that could be produced through these actions, as well as proposed timelines for their implementation and responsible actors. As I mentioned previously, the questions in our questionnaire are based specifically on the indicative actions for which parties are named as the first leading responsible actor. So in this case, that would apply to indicative actions 1.1.2 and 1.1.3 that you can see here. So here's an example of how we translate the indicative actions from the gender plan of action into our questionnaire. So here's an example specifically for indicative action 1.1.2. As you can see, we have included the expected outcomes and organized the questions in our questionnaire under the same expected outcomes as those from the gender plan of action. We've also included the objectives under which these actions lie. And then we've translated the indicative actions into questions with the wording as closely aligned as possible. So in this case, Indicative Action 1.1.2 has been translated into question 1.1 in our questionnaire and asks, has your country taken measures to update national legislation so that all women and girls have equitable access to ownership and control over biological resources, as well as land and waters? So now you have an idea of the process of developing a first draft of the methodology. Stage 2 of co-development involved consultations and peer review of the draft metadata document and the calculation tool. And who was reviewed in this? Who reviewed these documents? These were parties, observers, and major groups to the CBD. So we started collecting feedback from parties, observers, and major stakeholder groups through 2 online information sessions that were held earlier this year in April, as well as an in-person session before SABSTA, where we presented an overview of the methodology and shared the metadata for feedback. Then from June to August, we held bilateral consultations online with parties to receive feedback on the methodology through their review of the metadata and calculator tool, and to also carry out piloting of this methodology. So thank you so much to any parties and representatives online who contributed to this process. Some parties also provided feedback through email or after presentations of the methodology at other events such as government organized events. And then between July 17th to August 30th, the draft metadata document and calculation tool was open for peer review by parties and observers following a CBD notification. So feedback on the methodology was received from a total of 28 respondents, of which 19 were parties from Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. All feedback received was systematically compiled in a spreadsheet, and each piece of feedback was carefully considered in the updating of the methodology in order to ensure it was practical and useful for parties and supported their reporting needs. Overall, feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Parties and observers found the methodology clear and the calculation tool easy to use. Particularly, parties found the indicator not only a useful tool for assessing progress on Target 23, but as my colleague Catherine mentioned at the start, they also found it a useful tool for implementation and planning through the identification of gaps and highlighting areas for further work. So that was a general overview of some of the overarching feedback, but now I'm going to discuss some of the key improvements we made to the methodology based on the feedback we received. So we received feedback that some questions were complex and had many sub-elements that made them difficult to answer. Since the questions are based on negotiated text from the Gender Plan of Action, we kept the wording of the questions closely aligned to the wording of the indicative actions, but we used the answer options to further unpack the indicative actions and identify key elements in order to support parties in answering these questions. We also received feedback that distinctions between answer options could be improved. So we provided more detailed bracketed guidance next to each answer option to make these distinctions more clear. In response to feedback, we also strengthened the option to provide examples by tailoring these per question to provide guidance on the type of information and examples that parties could provide to make this easier and to support the systematic compilation of evidence for national reporting. We also clarified links with the binary indicator for target 23, which I'll discuss in more detail in the following slide. And we updated the method of computation, which now starts with categorical values of progress between 0 and 3, which will also be discussed in more detail later. So here's an example of how we integrated some of these improvements into the updating of the metadata and the methodology, specifically the questionnaire. So here's an example from question 1.1. As you can see, we've clearly annotated questions with links to questions from the binary indicator for target 23. So you can see in this case, question 1.1 links to question 23.2 from the binary indicator. And this is so that parties can easily identify major overlaps and help streamline their reporting. We've also revised the answer options with bracketed guidance for each answer option to better differentiate between answer options and unpack the indicative actions. And then finally, at the bottom, you can see we've provided more tailored guidance for types of information and examples parties can provide or supporting evidence parties can provide. And as I mentioned, this is to make this process easier and support the compilation of evidence. So I'm now going to quickly give an overview of how we have addressed linkages with the binary indicator for target 23 in the monitoring framework. So the idea is that the indicator we've co-developed can be used by parties to support them in gathering evidence and reporting on the binary indicator. As an example, question 23.3 from the binary indicator for target 23 asks parties to apply a gender-responsive approach in their implementation of the global biodiversity framework. This indicator can clearly help parties identify the types of activities that could be conducted as part of gender-responsive implementation and provide more accurate responses and appropriate supporting evidence. Key linkages with the questions presented in the binary indicator for target 23 have been mapped and provided in a table in the metadata, which can also be seen on this slide, as well as clearly annotated in the questionnaire, as I showed you earlier, to highlight these key linkages and overlaps and reduce any duplication of efforts. I should note, while the key linkages have been mapped, as you can see here, as I mentioned before, all the questions which make up this indicator are relevant for answering can be relevant for answering question 23.3. Finally, just to note, the indicator addresses key elements of gender-responsive implementation that extend beyond the binary indicator for target 23, such as women and girls' access to resources, services, technologies, and financing, the protection of Indigenous women and girls' rights and their traditional knowledge, measures against gender-based discrimination and violence relating to ownership, control, and access to natural resources, as well as the creation of enabling conditions for gender-responsive implementation, which includes capacity building, financing, coordination mechanisms, and so forth. So now I'm going to pass you on to my colleague, Claudia, who's going to walk you through some of the changes we made to the calculation methodology. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Aisha. Good day to everyone. Another thank you for taking the time to be here with us and reiterating the contributions that were made along this co-development process as well. So I'll show you a little bit of the calculation framework itself. It is set on 4 steps that are illustrated in this diagram. All of the approaches taken are well established in other indicators already in the framework. We also took on board guidance prepared by the OTEC group, so the ad hoc technical expert group on the indicators that supports the Secretariat of the CBD, and also drawing on relevant indicators on the sustainable development goals that focus specifically on gender, and so are also relevant for this particular indicator. So as you can see here on this diagram, from the left to the right-hand side, we have each of these lines represent a question on the questionnaire that is presented. They are under expected outcomes, and they are organized under the 3 expected outcomes of the Gender Plan of Action. The questions can either be answered by a single or a select all that apply answer, and these are presented in the calculation tool as a drop-down menu. As a user clicks on one of those answers, then the following cells are populated automatically. So as it has been mentioned, this has been found a very useful tool, and we kept this automation properties on the calculation tool itself. So one key feature that has changed was the first step of the calculations. So on the column there that says progress category. So once the answers have been chosen, it is allocated a category of progress on each of those responses, and they range from 0 if no progress has been achieved to 3 with a full implementation achieved under that aspect. You may also note that there is one line regarding question 1.5 that is left blank. And this is one particular example that we left open should parties believe that this is not applicable to their national circumstances. So this does not come into further considerations for the methodological calculation of the index. So given we have category of progress, then we move to the second step. And this is a normalization, a scale that will turn those 0, 1, 2, 3 numbers onto a more intuitive scale of 0 to 1 that can then be also multiplied to represent percentages. So this come into play then to leap onto the next step, step 3, in which we aggregate the relevant answers within each of the expected outcomes to deliver an index per outcome. So you'll see that on the second left column to the right, there are only 3 numbers. So we aggregate the question values to then create one expected outcome index. This has been found particularly useful by the parties that were able to test this tool, as you can monitor progress and seek ways to improve going forward on individual expected outcomes. And then the final step, step 4, we aggregate these 3 indicators, these 3 indices, onto one final index. And in here, we make sure that each of those 3 expected outcomes have equal weight. This follows, again, closely the Gender Plan of Action, in which there is no indication that some of the aspects are more important than others. And so therefore, we use no weighting in these calculations. And we also use here a little nuance as well, the usage of a geometric mean, which enhances that each of these outcomes are addressed. Again, they're all equally important, and we wanted to reflect that on the thinking of the methodology. So on to the next slide, please, Aisha. We also provide some interpretation options. Parties can use this as they see best for their national context and the planning that they have in hands. So one example, parties can choose to just focus on that last figure. And so this example here, this is just an illustrative example. Country A has an index of 70% regarding progress towards the national implementation of a gender plan of action. It could also be seen as a traffic light system if you would divide into 3 classes. And so country A in this instance is making good progress and is on track towards the full implementation of the gender plan of action. It is also possible to pick on those 3 individual expected outcome indices. And so in this instance, country A is showing good progress on the implementation, while also excelling at aspects covered by outcomes 1 and 3, with 80 and 77.8% respectively, while showing some room for improvement under expected outcome 2, with a score of 55.6%. And you can draw some plots from this. It is to note that this is a tool used for each of the parties, each of the interested groups, and mostly to track progress between different times for their own progress, for their own work. So if these numbers are being put into context for this national usage and to assist tracking of progress. So on to the next slides, please. Just to finalize by saying that this information is going to be made available online. You might have picked on the chat here that these are currently, documentation are currently being made available online. So they will be available soon. The most recent version is going to be available soon with these linkages. And Women4Biodiveristy and UNEP-WCMC will reach out to let you know that updates have been made. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or any requests for information, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll also provide Aisha's email. So with that, I thank you all for your attention and hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, Aisha, and Catherine. I would encourage the participants to please write their questions in either the chat box if the Q&A box is not accessible. But since maybe I could start with a question. So we know that there were quite a few bilaterals with different parties. I would just like to know what were some of the key, you could say, key asks commonly asked across the parties for updating the methodology. Which were the key questions that parties were keen to incorporate? If you could just shed some light on that.
Sure, I can start and then I'll hit Aisha, Claudia, you can provide further input. But the key things that we were requested to address were, what are the linkages with the binary indicator? How does this relate to reporting on the gender plan of action? Some parties were in favor of keeping the wording of the actions as it was adopted in the gender plan of action, because this would remind them what was adopted and answer the questions based on their own national circumstances. But parties noted that the text was negotiated in the COP, and the people that might be answering this questionnaire or reporting on this indicator might not necessarily might not have been necessarily been involved in the discussions and the negotiation. So in this case, we had to find a balance to keep the wording, but find a way to unpack what this action means and provide examples, and that's one of the key changes. Overall, the feedback that we received of the computation of the indicator was positive, but we received very useful feedback from the UK to improve this, so we've made the changes. That's it. Those are the key things that I remember. Aisha, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great recap, and not much to add because I did I will bring up one or two points, but I did mention them in the presentation, so I won't go into too much detail. But there was a strong request from parties to clarify distinctions between answer options and provide a little bit more guidance. So we've done our best to do that by providing detailed text next to each option to better differentiate those answer options. And then another request that did come up a few times was the request to make the option to provide examples stronger. And so, as I mentioned, we addressed that by tailoring those requests a little, the option for examples a bit, and providing some guidance that can help parties identify the types of information that would be most useful for providing as examples. Yeah, Claudia, over to you. Anything?
Yeah, thank you. I can add in more specific terms of the calculations and the calculation tool that by far parties found it quite helpful. And there was also the call to maybe try to provide more detail. And our challenge was to keep the tool simple. So capturing the main points. Yeah. And then also providing space to gather evidence and examples, to share experiences, to be helpful not only for the parties, for each of the nations themselves, but also then to share experiences with other countries that might be also wanting to do similar work. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Ms. Dias. Will the answer to the questions have to be supported by a report? How can the veracity of the information reported by the parties be confirmed?
So what we've suggested on the methodology is that countries use this indicator as a tool to keep progress towards the different actions where they are the leading responsible actor. And through suggestions from parties as well, we've provided some text that notes as a reminder in each question that, if available, provide examples, and we unpack a little bit of what sort of the examples would be useful based on what is addressed in the action. And what we're suggesting is that, yes, this indicator is a measure, and they can use the indicator in the relevant section, target to report progress on target 23, but that evidence that they've gathered to make that assessment for answering the questions, then they can use that to report on the annex of the national report of the Gender Plan of Action. As Claudia noted, many parties made a comment that this would be fantastic because they can learn from best practices, and the national reports then are also a useful tool for knowledge exchange and peer review. Anything else, Aisha, Claudia?
I think those are the key points. Exactly to reemphasize what Catherine mentioned, the indicator is really intended as a tool for parties themselves to use to track their own progress and to compile evidence of this progress. And it's not something that we're imagining to be comparative between countries. So therefore, the idea of the evidence gathering is for the parties themselves to have this, to compile this, to store this somewhere, and to be able to see their progress over time. That's it for me.
Thank you, Catherine and Aisha. There is a similar question. Is there any other indicator or methodology that captures the commitments of private sector actors and the contributions of other actors included in the Gender Plan of Action?
Well, this indicator, or the indicator that was adopted in Decision 15.5, focuses on the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. By that, we interpreted and based on 18 indicative actions where parties, national governments are the lead responsible actor, and they are the ones that need to report on progress. There's an assumption that the national implementation of the gender plan of action focuses on those actions from governments. There are a couple of actions in the gender plan of action where the private sector is named the lead responsible actor. We actually had a discussion about how to address this, but we had to balance what would be the minimum required for parties to report on and keep the questionnaire as small as possible. And the smallest we could get was to 18 questions. But as you may know, there'll be other processes for contributions from non-state actors. So if the private sector or specific organizations from the businesses are taking efforts to also contribute towards the gender responsive implementation of the global biodiversity framework, or they are taking measures that contribute to Target 23, then they can report on these efforts in their non-state actor contributions.
Thanks, Catherine. We have a question from Ms. Pat. One of the UK's concerns was around elements of the gender plan of action that might not be relevant for all parties, and therefore bringing down the overall scoring. Was that taken into account so parties can opt for some actions without it being detrimental?
Over to you, Aisha, but my understanding is that there was only one question where this was a concern.
Yeah, I can briefly touch on the questions for which we've provided a non-applicable option, but then I'll hand over to Claudia to give it some insights on how that would affect the calculations. But yeah, exactly as Catherine says, we only provided a non-applicable option for one question, which is specifically the question on Indigenous people, women from Indigenous peoples and local communities. However, we did address some of the UK specific feedback for questions that were noted as potentially non-applicable in the current form that they were in. So we'd be happy, hopefully when we share the new version of the methodology, that might address some of your concerns specifically. And I'll hand to Claudia right now.
Yes, thank you. This was on our minds. There is only indeed one such instance. Or there should be. I guess we can also discuss and are welcome to take on board if there are other parties that find that there's more than one non-applicable situation, but we believe there's only this one instance that Aisha has alluded to. This has very, very little implications on the calculation generation itself. That question is not taken into consideration in particular. And to reiterate, the tool is mostly valuable for country, for the context of a country. So the progress over time would show mostly the differences in between each of the outcomes. And so this one particular aspect would not be detrimental to the calculations and to the interpretation. Thank you for your question.
Thanks. I think this is an important question from Sumina. For people who are interested in gender equality and biodiversity conservation, but not technically well versed, why is this indicator so important to be adopted?
We think it's an important indicator to be adopted because it's making a link between two important commitments that parties have made. They've adopted Target 23 that focuses on gender equality and the gender responsive implementation of the global biodiversity framework. And as part of the monitoring framework, which has the indicators that will enable parties to assess progress towards targets overall, for the specific case of Target 23, the core measure that is on the table right now is 4 questions that parties will need to answer that compose the global binary indicator. But if countries want to deep dive into the gender responsive implementation, then it will be useful to remember what was adopted in the Gender Plan of Action, which provides a guide to ensure the gender-responsive implementation of the GBF. So what this indicator does is that it unpacks those different actions that are meant to be taken at national level to be able to progress towards the achievement of Target 23. Yes, it is parties who will make use of this indicator, and they are the ones that will be required to report on progress. But I do think that we all benefit from the achievement of Target 23. So even though, Nina, you're not a technical person, in a way with communications and advocacy and raising awareness on this indicator, then it is a contribution towards the achievement of this target.
Thanks, Catherine. There's another question, more like a comment. It is not clear why it cannot be used to compare between countries. I believe that it is a standardized indicator, and if it can be made comparable.
Yes, well, it's a new indicator, and we need to start slow. The indicator will be available for countries to use, and if these are used in national reports, we wanted to provide the flexibility of using this indicator and finding ways to interpret it as best fits their national needs. So let's see if parties are using this indicator in their national reports, and based on that, then the option to explore, to compare progress between countries or within regions can be explored. But I think it's a little bit early to say. We first of all need to see if countries are using it and how they are using it. But in theory, based on the calculation method, this should be possible, but let's see.
There's a question from Ms. Sandra Solis. Once each party conducts the evaluation based on the results of our index, will they be able to send us feedback or recommendations to advance the implementation of the GPA?
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you so much for also contributing towards the development of this methodology. As my colleagues have noted, obviously this will be, these efforts will be led at the national level, but just to note that Women4Biodiveristy and UNEP-WCMC are here to support in the use of the indicator if that's useful.
Mr. Williams has asked if we can put back the slide about the calculation on the screen, and then he would like to ask a question. Aisha, would you be able to? Okay.
Thank you, Aisha. And can I check if you can hear me, please?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Lovely. That's great. Thank you. I'll just let Aisha get to the right slide before I start talking, because otherwise it will get confusing. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So I think what you've done here, and I'd like to query this. So this is I'm semi-making a comment, but I'm also semi-asking questions because I'm not quite sure I've understood the revision to the methodology. So please bear with me. What you've done is to take a categorical answer in your first column there after the question. So 3, 2, 1, yeah? But you've then transformed that into a numerical score of effectively a third, 2/3, 1, and you are then calculating based upon that numerical value an overall percentage. Can I just check if that's what you're doing before I sort of make any comment, please?
That is correct, James. That's correct. So there's a scale of 0, 1, 2, 3. They have a natural order, so 3 is always going to be bigger than 0.
Yep.
3 is the best that one could get, so it's 100%, and 0 is none achieved. That's 0%. You're right.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm still, I think, a little concerned, and I will need to read the revised methodology carefully before being sure. But one of the comments that we had made from the UK was with respect to turning those values into percentages in terms of it's not actually a continuous scale, and therefore whether you actually have a proper percentage value coming out of the far end of the calculation, I'm not certain about. Hence, I'm pleased you're using the 3-2-1 scale. I think that's useful. I think that links more closely with the work that the RTEC had done. But the comment I think I had made in response to the consultation was around actually bringing together the answers from 1.1 to 1.6, for example, using those categorical answers, and then scaling the whole of section 1 as being a 0 to 5, using the same methodology that the RTEC has come up with for the other binary indicators. And I'm worried whether this turning this into thirds, 2/3, 1 is a proper use, a good use of those categorical answers. So I'm still a bit concerned about how you're coming to a percentage answer at the end of the calculations here, as opposed to a ordinal answer on a scale of 1 to 5.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. And indeed, greatly our thinking and change in this respect was following OTEC and the UK feedback. So thank you for that. Also, one of the reasons why we present the calculation tool like this is that it is very visible what each of the steps are presenting. And so parties can choose which way it's best to fit their reporting purposes. Some of the feedback that we received, for example, was that the preferred way of showcasing the result would be with a traffic light system. And as Catherine suggested, it would be incredibly valuable to see how this indicator is used, also to see if the 0, 1 to 3 works best, or indeed parties prefer a number. In our technical revision, there is no way around the 3 is 100%. So the scaling and the normalization would grant you then access to the interpretation in a more numerical way, and with such those plots that can be used to compare between expected outcomes. So if this is not clear, then I'm happy to take it further. But I thank you very much again for your concerns and for your questions.
And just to quickly add, there are some countries that we tested the methodology that actually preferred the percentage. The update on the calculation has been based on other indicators, and Claudia can provide information on this. Mm-hmm. And James will share the metadata, the calculation, and the calculation tool early next week for your review and before we make this online. But all of your input, feedback, and the work on the specific computation has been revised by our chief scientist. So hopefully you'll agree, but we'll share this with you when it's available early next week.
Thank you very much indeed. I very much look forward to seeing that. I am slightly concerned how a traffic light system and a numerical answer fit together, but that's something we can come back to.
Thank you, Mr. Williams, and thank you, Claudia and Catherine. We have time for one more question, if there's anybody interested in asking a question, you can go ahead and do so right now. If you could raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, I think it seems like we can move on. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, Catherine, Aisha, and Claudia for presenting this today. This is our second session for the day. So the recordings will be made available shortly so that all of the participants can also go back and review the sessions. We will also have the methodology up next week, the revised methodology, as Catherine has said. And just to also thank everybody, especially the parties who are here, who contributed to this methodology and its update. Thank you so much. And we hope that when we make it available next week for you to go through again, you can take it up at COP16 and get it adopted. We now have Ms. Ashnapuri Hertz from SwedBio. She's a program officer, and we would really like to thank SwedBio for the support that they have given us towards the methodology. Puri, if you can just make a few closing remarks.
Yes, thank you so much, Minal. Good afternoon, good morning, good day, everyone. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the team for this great work that you've done so far. I think we as SwedBio, we're very honored to be part of this collaboration with you. And also definitely a big thanks to all who have been engaged in testing the previous version, and also those who have been engaged in peer reviewing and being part of this journey so far. So it's been a long journey. I think as my colleague actually did the closing remark this morning, and she mentioned about the start, how Women4Biodiveristy also launched the idea of the gender-specific target, and then in COP15 we have the whole GBF adopted, including then the target 23, but then also the gender plan of action was adopted, and this has been a great achievement. And now basically Women4Biodiveristy together with UNEP-WCMC come up with this methodology for indicators that really allows for understanding, deep diving on how tracking the progress of gender responsiveness, but also then really linking the target 23 and also the gender plan of action. And this has been a very fantastic work. And it also allows to better understand how we include women in the whole of society approach, but also then looking at what type of impacts and adversity that are basically faced by women, and how the indicators also provide a strong potential for better coordinations at the national level and also better reporting at the national reporting. So this is a really an achievement in itself. So we would like to congratulate the team again. And so moving forward, we do expect that this indicator will be adopted because also this has been shown that it's possible to develop this new methodology, and this will foster progress of the whole GBF itself. So I think last but not least, we would also like to thank the participants of this webinar for all of these wonderful questions and also inputs that allows also the progression of this methodology moving forward. So yeah, we look forward to be engaging more in this process, to be part of this journey. And thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of the day and have a good weekend, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Puri. Just before we go, if everybody could please switch on their cameras, and we can just take a group picture.
Thanks, Meenal. I'll just wait for everybody to open their cameras. It's okay if you don't want to. Just bear with me 2 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And one more, please. Sorry about the sound notification. I'm getting emails. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selena. Just before we go, I would just like to share that we are, can you see my slide?
Yes, we can, Meenal.
Okay, so we are going to have 2 side events on the methodology on the 21st at COP16, and before that, we also have the Gender and Environment Data Conference on the 20th of October. We would like your participation in the same. If you are going to be at Kali, please do register. We will share the link in the chat box. And we also have a side event on the 22nd at 9:45 in the Columbia Pavilion. So for everyone at Kali, we really hope to see you there and to interact with you, and hope that the methodology gets adopted at COP. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.